Hello everyone, so this is going to be the tutorial on how to make the fabric boot that I showed in a previous video. I originally made the tutorial when I was making the boots that I had in that video, but then I realized you couldn't see a lot that was going on because the fabric was a light color and the cotton was a light color, and I'm not used to filming from this angle. My hands were getting in the way a little bit, so I've decided to film the tutorial again, and the tutorial will be on the basic boot. It won't include any decorating with laces and jewels and things like that. That is totally up to you how you want to decorate your boot. It will be on the making of the fabric boot. The actual pattern that I will have up on my Pinterest for you, I was a bit curious because I've seen ladies make the sachet boots, and that's really beautiful, and I was curious how the pattern piece would turn out for the sachet boot, and that is how the exact same pattern turns out as a sachet boot, which is just two pieces of fabric sewn together and stuffed. Now, in my opinion, it's too long in the toe. I would shorten it to there at least, but it'd make a great Halloween witch's boot, wouldn't it? So there you go. If you want to use the pattern as a sachet boot as well, just shorten the toe, and I'll mark that on the pattern piece anyway. Just you're just taking about an inch off the toe, and I think it balances it out much better. But yep, it works wonderful as a little sachet boot. So we'll get started with the tutorial. The first thing you have to do, of course, is cut your pattern pieces out. Now you will have a boot piece, a back piece, a front piece, and a sole piece. The sole, the front, and the back, you cut one of each. With the side part, you cut two. Try and get it laid. I'll put a little arrow, the grain of the fabric to go a certain way. And this is my draft pattern, but as you can see, I've put a little cutting line there for if you want to make the sachet boot, where to cut it off to make it a little bit more appealing. So once you've cut your boot out of your fabric, remove the pins from the pattern. I'll also just put a little guide on the seam allowance I left when I sewed mine, and it's about 1/4 of an inch. And you've got to do that on all seams. You've got to keep your seams exactly the same every time you sew. The same, like if you're using 1/2 an inch, use 1/2 an inch everywhere. If you're using 1/4 of an inch, use 1/4 of an inch everywhere. Otherwise your pattern pieces won't line up very well. Now this particular fabric I've chosen so that you will see the thread. I don't have many dark color fabrics, and so I'm hoping this will work quite well, but it is a bit hard for me to tell the right side from the wrong side on this because it's like that shot silk. It was an old pillowcase I got from the second-hand shop, so I'll be back in a moment once I've taken all my pins out. So firstly, we're starting off with one side boot and our front pattern piece, and what we're going to do, putting our right sides together, which is very difficult to tell on this fabric, but like I said, I needed to get a darker fabric too, so you could see the stitching on. Putting your right sides together, you're going to get the corner of your toe piece here and the narrow end of your front piece. You're going to line them up just like that. Okay, so it's going like that, and then we're going to get those corner pieces together and we're going to pin that just like that to hold it in place. And now what we're going to do is we're going to fit this straight piece of fabric around these curves of the boot, and that's called easing. And so very carefully we're going to match this edge up with this curved edge, and as we do it we're going to pop a pin in to keep it in place. When we go around this very curved toe piece, our pins are going to be very close together so that it keeps everything where it's meant to be. You will tuck the fabric will actually tuck on the straight piece side, but that's okay because the tuck will sit back from the stitching like that. See how got to see my viewfinder here. See how there's a tiny little tuck in the fabric here, but up closer to where the stitching will go, that will lay flat, so it won't pucker once we've sewn it. We're going to bend it right around the curve and keep these pins nice and close together. Put another little tuck there, further down, and keep that up like that. Now this is probably a little bit tricky for a beginner, but if you never try these things, you'll never learn how to do them, and you would be surprised how doable they actually are. Like, there looks like there's a lot of pins there, and there is, but don't be scared of that. That's just to hold things in place. And then of course once you come out onto the flat part again, you can spread your pins. Now we're going to do it the opposite way. We have a different, sorry, I'm trying to make sure I stay in shot. We have a different curve. Instead of going around like that, it's going around this way, and we're using the same principle here. This part of the fabric of the front is going to come up like that and meet that one now. But first, once we get to this curve here, we're going to put a pin in there so that that part stays nice and flat. And then we're going to bring this up and pin it here. And again, up like that. And I hope my fingers aren't too much in the way, but it's not the easiest thing to film. But there, like that. So the straight part has matched, and on that side there's no tucks or anything like that. And we're just going to do that all the way up the front of the boot. Like that. Just matching that straight part, pulling it up, pinning it where it needs pinning to hold it in place, because it's not going to want to go there, but it will go there. And then back up like that, all the way to the top of the boot. Okay. And those end bits should meet up just nicely on your boot. The corners to the top of the boot should meet. If not, it's okay if there's a little bit of difference, because when you finish sewing you can trim them both to the same height. Okay, don't stress over ½ an inch being out at this end, because we can always trim the top of the boot, but we can't trim the toe. So you need to be starting at the toe of your boot, not the opposite way around, because this part needs to be nice and fitting properly. So now what I'm going to do is sew that, and let's hope we can get this properly on camera. Okay, I guess we'll just try it. I hope we can. Now I'm using a white thread so that you can see it. Normally you would try and match your thread to the fabric as much as possible. I'm going to be using a straight stitch, and I'm putting it on just over a number 2 stitch length, so it's a very small stitch length. I'm going to use about 1/4 inch seam allowance, which means I'm going to be sewing about there, about 1/4 inch from the edge of my boot. First thing you do, and you usually have little gauges on your feet showing you, like I've got a little mark there, and that shows me where I want to keep the edge of my fabric, and the middle mark will tell me where my needle is going. Yours may be different, but you will always have little markings, or most of the times have little markings on your feet. Now I'm going to put my needle into my fabric to start with, and then I'm going to remove that very first pin I put in, because the needle is holding it in place now. I'm going to flatten that out nicely, put my foot down, and very carefully, and I'm hoping, I really am hoping this fabric plays nicely, because it is quite a flimsy kind of fabric, and sometimes they don't like to play nice. But a cotton would work well for this. I just didn't have a dark colour. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches backwards, just to start my seam off, because I don't want the threads coming undone on my toe. Okay, a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to remove my next pin, and I'm going to sew very carefully around the corner of my toe, a couple of stitches at a time, so that I can remove my pins. I don't want to be running over my pins. That can be a bit dangerous. You might break your needle, or it might fly in your eye. So don't run over your pins. Take it very slowly. Make sure it's not catching, you know, make sure your fabric's not caught underneath it or anything like that. Occasionally you're going to have to lift your foot up, making sure your needle is in the fabric, and give it a little turn so that it turns around that toe piece. Taking my next pin out. Is that the right one? I think I might have taken the wrong one out. I'll take 2 out. And of course you can use your hand turner on the side of your machine too. There we go. Okay, so I've ended up taking most of my pins out going around that corner, because it was... There we go. Take pin out as you come to it. Remember to always put the needle into the fabric before taking the pin out. And don't put the needle down on top of the pin either. Just in those spaces where there aren't as many pins, just make sure your fabric's lining up nicely still. Of course, you can go a bit faster when the lines get straighter. Keep our fingers crossed that that went okay. So that's, you can see that stitching. That's where we've stitched there at the top, and that's the toe part we've stitched there. And see how that you can see those two little tucks on that side. Once you go like this, run your thumb over it, and look, there you go. The seam is fine. Same with there. Just run your thumb over it, and they flatten out. You know, even if you catch a bit of fabric and you make a little tuck, 90% of you are going to be putting lace all over your boot anyway, so any little mistakes or anything like that you won't see. So don't panic too much if you end up with a little tuck, because unless it throws the whole thing out of shape, which I doubt that will happen, you're going to cover it with laces and trims and things like that anyway. I mean, see how much lace is on this boot, on the toe. Gotta find the, yeah, there we go. On the toe and things like that. If you were to make a little tuck in your seam, you would never know anyway. So I'll just get the other side of the boot. Okay, so we've got our other side of our boot, and of course the two halves go like that on top of one another like that. And what you're going to do is exactly the same thing, but you're going to make sure that seam there is facing that way, and try not to get it caught in what we're doing here. So placing it on top of the other boot just about, and getting those two corners. There's the corner of the front part there. That's what we want to line up with the corner of our boot, just like we did last time. We're going to join those together there. Lost the pincushion. And pin it. Like that. Okay, so it's pinned. You can see the other side. There's the seam we just did on the front, and there's the other side of our boot. So we're going to do that, and we're going to carefully, it's exactly the same as what we did before, but this time the boot is on top and the straight seam is underneath. But we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to take it up and pin it. Okay, so there's all our pins in around our toe. Go check the other side and be sure you don't have this other seam caught in your pins. Okay, because you don't want to be sewing those together. You need to keep this first seam. Can you see that? On the other side, there's the seam that we did before. You need to keep that out of the way, especially going around this corner piece here. You don't want to be getting it stuck in your toe piece. Okay, so if you can pull it all back like that and make sure it's completely out of the way of those pins like that, then you should be fine. Okay, now I'm just going to do the same sort of thing. I'm going to now if you want to sew it on this side so you don't get those caught, that's completely up to you. You can, now that you've pinned it, you can start at the top if you like and work your way down. I still prefer to start at the toe to make sure that this part is how I want it, and trim the top if there's a little bit, because see how that has not quite lined up at the top here, that doesn't worry me at all, because as I sew and take my pins out, it may actually move that fabric up a little bit anyway. So that's why I like to start at the toe. So I'm going to sew that and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so we have both our pieces tied together. I hope I'm still in the right place because I just knocked my camera flying. And of course this fabric does fray a lot, the one I'm using here, which is not such a good thing, but sorry about that. So we've got both our pieces sewn in together now, and what we're going to do is we're going to check it. Just pull everything over like that and check that you've got nothing caught that you can't fix or disguise or anything like that as you go. And it goes right down, and there's our nice little toe. There's a slight tuck in there, but that's okay because, you know, more than likely it will be covered once it's done anyway. And there is the front of our boot, like that. Okay, now put it back inside out because we need to do the back of our boot. So grab your back piece, which will look like this, sort of like a vase, and we're going to do the same sort of thing again. We're going to open our boot up, right sides together. I'm going to start on this side actually. We're going to match our heel up. Now if you're a sewer with some experience, you may feel the need not to pin, and that's quite alright. I'm putting pins in for the sake of those that, you know, aren't that confident in sewing, so that I can show them that it still is something doable. So just bringing both sides to meet up. These curves aren't quite as strong as the toe curves. The toe curves, and probably when we do the heel, are the most difficult parts. Other than that, it's fine, but just take your time with everything and it'll be fine. And perhaps, yeah, don't use this kind of silky fabric I'm using. Use something a little bit more forgiving, perhaps a nice cotton fabric would be easy. You're going to cover it probably anyway. Okay, so starting at the bottom again at our heel piece and sewing up. So there's our back piece done, like that, and that's the other side there. And now we've got our pattern piece out like that. We're going to bring this part of the boot up with this and join it all together. So putting our heels together, right sides of the fabric together, we're going to sew up that back seam now. Putting your pin in and doing exactly the same as we just did, all the way up the back. I'll be back shortly. Okay, so I've just sewn down that back piece. I'm just going to trim my threads off a bit. And that's the body of our boot done now. And see how the back is, it's a little bit longer. That's fine, we can trim that up. In fact, I can trim that up right now. It's just a matter of taking it off. And I'm just going to adjust that on my pattern as well, because if I can find my other scissors. This is okay, there we go. Right, so that is the back of our boot now. Okay, can you see how that is starting to all take shape? Front, the side, the back, and now we're going to put our sole in. This is a fun part. Grab a cup of coffee. Okay, so here's making sure I'm under the camera properly. There's the toe of our shoe. We are going to start at the toe of our shoe, right where all those seams meet here. Okay, we still have our shoe inside out, and that's how we need it. So find the toe of your shoe, putting the right sides together again. We're going to put that point of our sole, let's see, point of our sole here, a point of our sole like that, and we're going to pin it in place like so. So it stays right at the tip there. And now we're going to line this seam up with the outside of our boot, and we're going to put some pins in again. Like I said before, if you don't need pins, that's fine, just sew around, easing where you need to ease. We have a few curves here, nothing too drastic. And there's our heel part coming up here, see that? That's our heel part coming up. We're going to have to take that curve around there. Like that. And then we've got a really tight little bend under here. So we're going to do exactly how we did it for our toe piece. It's just sort of going in the opposite direction. We want to have this straight part here lining up with this curve part up here. So we're just going to bring that curve down to meet our straight piece and pin. Good to have sharp pins too. Same thing, bring it down to meet that straight piece and pin it. Now there's one thing you need to do here, and that is not go all the way to the end. We want to leave about, what would that be, 1 centimetre or 3/4 of an inch, we'll say. Okay, that's what we want to leave. So that last pin there is where you're going to stop sewing. For that we need this little bit at the end, so don't cut it off. Okay, so I'm going to sew that. Can you see that? Okay, so we're starting at the toe, putting our needle in, taking our pin out, and straightening our fabric. Don't want anything caught underneath, so always check. Better to go slow than too fast. And I think my machine just did a silly thing then, so just let me check what happened. Yes, it did. Is it going to matter? Okay. I just decided to eat the fabric a little bit. It sometimes happens when you're using a... I'll just back. That could be that pin. Hopefully that fixed it. It sometimes happens when you're using a slippery fabric. Yeah, I'll go back and fix that in a minute. maneuvering around your corner, lifting up your foot to make everything nice and even. I hope my hands aren't in the way all the time. I know they're not very pretty hands either, so I do apologise for that. I don't have elegant hands. Now you're going to have to make sure all this stuff here underneath is not getting trapped under your needle as you come around that corner. So just take it nice and easy. Checking all the time. Now remember, we don't want to go right to the end. We want to be stopping before we get to the end. Okay. So just checking my inner corner seam, and that went all right. But I've missed that toe part right at the beginning. So just to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to get rid of those threads first so I can see what I'm doing. Do you see in this corner how I've missed this little bit while I'm sewing? I'm going to turn it over and sew from the other side. I can see where I need to go. That way it won't suck my fabric in because I'm coming from the opposite way. Okay, let's have a little look at that and make sure. So that's our toe, that's alright, that'll be fine. There's that, where it goes out, and there's our heel there, and we've left our little flap at the other end. So now we're going to do the other side. Here's our toe part. See, there's our boot. There's our boot like that. Here's our toe. Here's our sole. And this is our last seam that we're going to sew now. We're going to line that up, and we're going to sew it on this side of the boot this time. Unless, of course, you're left-handed, then everything will be flipped to the opposite, I'm gathering. So do your pinning all the way along. Going to do exactly the same thing, matching up all your edges, pulling that heel part down like that to meet the straight piece, and stopping that 3/4 of an inch before the end. If you accidentally sew to the end, that's okay. Just unpick it a little bit because you can't have it sewn right at the end. So I'll go ahead and sew that, and then I'll come back again.